Um, Next, we got medium, and I'm going to lean on you a little bit for this one, Soup.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've got our seed or our clone. We've had our testing. We know what we're working with. Now we want to start looking at what medium we want to put that in. So can you kind of talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of peat-based soils versus a cocoa versus a living soil?
Yeah, well, I think it's really important whenever you're planning out a grow, you really need to think of your grow as a system, right? And so you're going to kind of think of the way you feed your plant as sort of a system where your medium, your kind of soil that you're working with, or your growing kind of substance, and your nutrients need to be able to work together and play nicely together. So with that in mind, there's lots of different systems you can choose. So doing like a peat-based soil, I think you're talking about like a bag soil there, right? Or like a
Like a pro mix?
okay, so like a pro mix, yeah. So starting with something like that, you're working with like a mostly inert medium. So with something like that, you're really going to need nutrients that are able to partner up with that and work well with that. Um, Peat specifically has some issues as far as drying out, and you need to make sure you're keeping it moist. And so keeping the moisture level right with peat can be kind of an important thing to keep in mind. Cocoa, on the other hand, is a lot easier to water for a lot of people. Cocoa kind of behaves a little bit differently with water, and it's a lot harder to overwater, whereas peat can be a little bit easier to overwater. And then when you do or if you underwater it, it can really dry out, and then it becomes hydrophobic, which can make it really hard to kind of get it soaking water back up again. So whatever kind of style you're going with, it's important to just kind of keep in mind the pros and cons of the media you're working with. And also to choose nutrients, when you're looking at a nutrient line to pair with your medium, you want to try to find one that is designed to go with whatever media you're working with. So if you're doing kind of a cocoa grow, you want to make sure the nutrients you're using are compatible to work with cocoa, or you might need to make sure that you're kind of adjusting your formula a little bit, because cocoa sometimes needs more calcium and kind of other concerns like that. So whatever system you're using, it's important to just kind of keep in mind that your nutrients and your medium need to work together as a system.
So would you say like cocoa is more like a hydroponic type system where like say a living soil is just more like a water only type system?
Yeah, so that's like another thing to keep in mind is there's different ways that you can be watering and feeding your system. And so a cocoa or a peat pure base system is a lot more like hydroponics, really. Your nutrients are coming in liquid form. Your plant is feeding off those nutrients in liquid form. Whereas with living soil, you're really kind of more building a organic matter that you're kind of works as a battery to feed your plant for the long term. So living soil is kind of more of a long-term growing strategy, and it takes a little bit more planning and maybe a little bit more thinking ahead. But once you have done that planning and once you've put in that work ahead of time, it can be pretty easy, because if you've got the right soil built, you should have a good kind of battery full of nutrients that should last you a long time. But it's important to keep in mind there's different nutrient systems and different ways of feeding. And so whatever you're choosing, just kind of try to choose a compatible system where everything can kind of work together.
And so like for a lot of beginners, they're looking at nutrients and they see the NPK numbers, those ratios like 4-3-10 or whatever. Does that relate to ppms? And if so, how can you know with what you're looking at ratio wise how you're going to be set up ppm wise or EC wise?
Well, so the numbers on a fertilizer bottle or something like that stand for the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content of that fertilizer. And usually I believe it's measured as a percentage of the weight. So if you're looking, it's kind of a percentage. So that can give you a little bit of an indication of how concentrated the fertilizer is. So if you're looking at something with a higher number, that kind of gives you an indication that that's a much more concentrated product. So that tells you it might be a little bit stronger or have a little bit more nutrient in that kind of number or in that type of nutrient. So thinking about how that affects your ppm, I guess, kind of the higher numbers you're working with, that might determine the dosages that you're working with. And so a higher ppm fertilizer is going to, or a higher NPK fertilizer is going to come in with a much higher ppm when it's measured when you're feeding. Does that kind of
Interesting.
answer your question?
Yeah, well, and another thing is why we're on ppms around in a veg formula. Where should your ranges be for ppms, parts per million?
Well, again, it kind of depends on what nutrient system you're working with, right? Like, so depending on how much nutrient you have in your medium, that's going to affect how much nutrient you need to be feeding in, right? So if you're in maybe like a Coco or a peat based formula, I would say veg, you're probably looking at, somewhere between 400 and, maybe 700 or 800 ppm. I don't know, what do you usually use in your garden?
Me, around when I'm in flower, I'm around 1200 ppms.
1205. What in veg though? What do you start at?
Probably around 6. I start around 6 and then work my way up to about 8.
Yeah, so that's probably a good range. Depending on what your medium has in it. Like we said, if you're starting with something like a living soil, like the style I grow, I'm using mostly just water. I'm really not ever measuring my ppm, and I'm really never watering any fertilizer in, because all my fertilizer is kind of built into the soil with the style of growing I'm doing. So with your style, I think, yeah, when you're using like a Coco or a peat-based medium, keeping your ppms in mind and staying kind of within that range of sort of, yeah, like maybe 400 or 500 to about 800 in veg, and maybe 600 at the low end to maybe 1200 at the high end for flower. Does that sound about right?
So now, when you water in versus top dress, like for living soil, do you do like top dress to kind of mitigate any kind of deficiencies that you might have?
Yeah, so with living soil, I always kind of try to think of the soil as my battery, right? And so when you start with a good big pot of balanced soil, you've got a nice big battery full of nutrition there ready to feed your plant. But as your plant grows, it's going to slowly drain that battery down, right? It's slowly feeding off that battery to fuel its growth. And so at some point, you are going to need to recharge those batteries one way or another. And one of the ways you can do that is through top dressing. So top dressing is kind of taking some dry organic amendments. I like to mix them with compost first, and then you kind of lay a nice layer of it down on the top of your soil. And then you can water it. And as you water it, it kind of trickles those nutrients down through your medium. You can also cover it in mulch, which will really help break down that top dress layer and kind of keep it moist. And that actually lets the microbes from down below kind of come up and start chomping on it and start digesting it. And the microbes are really the engine that drives this whole process. They really help break down those organic nutrients in a top dress and help refuel that soil battery, so to speak.
And I
Speaking of,
so I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to jump in and suggest too, if you have live earthworms in there, they love this stuff. So you'll notice after putting this like sort of top dress on, like Soup's talking about, and covering it with some mulch, you'll notice within a couple of days, all your worms are all up in that.
Yeah.
And so that helps, chelate and get those nutrients in an accessible form. So I've just been loving the earthworm, action that comes with growing organic. And I also wanted to throw out a question, because I know there's a lot of people that wanted to watch this that are going to be coming in with no knowledge whatsoever. And so I would just love to hear us talk about some nutrient lines that we suggest that people check out. Because I know when I started growing, if you literally just type in, whatever, cannabis nutrient line or something like that, you'll just see what shows up first. And those are probably going to be the people that just spend the most money on showing up first in Amazon or in Google. And they're really not the greatest. They're, lines that have tons of bottles and might cost a lot of money. So I'd love to hear, I guess, the panel kind of suggest some nutrient lines that if you aren't growing organically, what are some nutrient lines that are great for someone that might be newer to growing?
Yeah, well, I can go over a couple suggestions and then we can throw it to the panel and let everybody kind of talk about it, I think. But one thing I would say is, first, if you're interested in learning about kind of what I'm talking about with living soil and doing that kind of a grow, one thing I would really check out is I actually wrote a whole article about how to get started growing that way. And so if you go to dudegrows.com/no-till for noobs, you will find an article there that kind of goes over the whole process of doing a living soil kind of no-till style of grow. It's got a nice walkthrough, talks about all the sort of products and all those sorts of things you guys would need. And then another nutrient that I recommend to people a lot of times, just looking for an easy system to get started on, if you're looking for like a bottled nutrient that works in a lot of different ways, one thing I always go to is BioBizz. BioBizz is a really simple system, just a couple of bottles. It's based on a ferment, so it is actually organic and it's really easy to use. And people who use it seem to get great tasting weed, and I've seen people winning contests and stuff with it. And so if you're looking for just a good, easy go-to bottle system, check out the BioBizz lineup. That's always just like a good tip I like to give people. So JR, what are you using, or you got any tips on nutrients?
I use a mix of stuff, and I use a lot of heavy microbes in my soil. And I kind of wanted to ask you about that as well, because like with a lot of the bottled nutrients, those nutrients are what I think they call chelated in a way that they're available ionically and enzymatically through the root zone, meaning they just absorbed into the roots. Can you speak a little bit about how microbes produce nutrients and their exchanges with the roots, and maybe talk a little bit about the difference between chelated nutrients and then maybe versus microbial interactions?
Yeah, I can touch on some of that. I'm not a chemist over here, but yeah, so microbes are kind of the biology that drives this whole system of growing in soil or growing in any medium, really. And microbes are really the interface between plants and nutrients. So plants actually communicate with the microbes in your soil through exudates that they send out through their roots. And those chemical signals, your plant can actually attract microbes that will bring nutrients and help feed the right kind of nutrients that your plants are looking for. So there's a whole system of communication and a whole kind of network of things going on down in your medium that you might not even be aware of. And a lot of that is all powered by microbes. And so adding some sort of beneficial microbes to your grow, either in the form of compost or a product like Recharge, products like Mammoth P and others, all of those things are really going to help improve the microbial diversity in your soil. And that's really going to help make those nutrients more available. No matter what kind of nutrients you're kind of using, microbes are great at breaking those nutrients down, storing them, and making them available to your plant, which is what we want, right? We want nutrients that our plant can use. So microbes are really kind of the interface between your plant and the nutrients. And so the more microbes you can provide in your soil and the better of a microbial environment you can grow in your soil, the healthier your grow is going to be in most cases.
Excellent, excellent. Great. So any more questions for Medium or for Soup here, panel?
I want to hear some more nutrient suggestions.
I ran Nectar for the Gods, if you're interested in an organic line. I ran Nectar for the Gods for quite a while. It's kind of a complicated system. You can go really stripped down, but if you want really stellar results, it takes, quite a few bottles. But very clean, very easy on your plants.
Yeah, I've always heard good things about it. I've always heard good things about it.
I was going to second that. When I did my no-till grow a year and a half ago, Nectar of the Gods really saved my butt when they weren't looking good. So I shout them out.
There's a lot of different, I think depending on where the listeners are, there's a lot of different nutrients available out there. So Nectar, I see a lot in the US, but it's not, I don't see it anywhere up here in Canada. Definitely not in Europe. So suggestions for other company or for other growers to start off with before they get into a no-till system. There's a lot of big companies out there, but some of the big companies are only representing big companies or big interests. And so there's a lot of medium to smaller nutrient companies out there. And, in the US, Nectar's one, New Millennium, products like, Canna's an old school company, a bit more pricier, but, really good product. Remo Newts, just a lot of small to mid-range companies. I would give them a really good look over some of the bigger guys. And don't get started on the whole line. Work in retail, the one thing I always told customers is start with a base nutrient and a couple of key additives you need. The key additives I always would recommend are something like silica, and nowadays something like a biology, like a recharge or whatnot. And outside of that, just start slow, because there are a lot of big companies and they're trying to push like 6, 7, 8 additives, a dozen additives, and it's just crazy. Don't do it. So just start with a base and a couple of key additives like silica I really like. And outside of that, just learn how to grow. Like as a new grower, you're talking to guys like Jeff and trying to figure out seeds and genetics, and then you're trying to learn no-till, which is maybe a bit too advanced. So you got to slowly get into it. But and all the challenges of growing, of air temperature and sexing, and just learning how to grow. So start simple. Don't buy 20 bottles. Just make it easy. It's not a race. It's a hobby, and enjoy it. And just take it one crop at a time. And just a lot of mid-range nutrients. So check them all out and just start slow.
Yeah, while we're talking about nutrients, Dinesh, can you speak a little bit about foliar nutrients and how a plant can absorb nutrients foliarly versus the roots?
Yeah, that's what we do at Optic Foliar, is just trying to reinvent the foliar spray game. And in the foliar spray game, the rules I grew up on, a lot of the rules our listeners grow up on and read in books and hear from fellow growers is, you don't foliar spray, and you only do it if it's got bugs or mold, or some people do it for nutrition, but there's, again, strings attached, as I like to say. So what we've done is, with our products, we show you how to spray lights on, no damage, no burning, no residuals. And the key thing I like to educate guys on is the mesophyll layer. So if we take our plant's leaf and we magnify it to the size of a building or a small house, chop it in half, and you can Google this yourself. It's all science. Mesophyll layer, MESOPHYLL. It's the manufacturing facility of the plant, in short. So it's going to take all the light energy or lighting you're providing, all the nutrients or no-till nutrition that your plants are taking. It takes it all to the leaf and it converts it to sugars and growth. And no other foliar spray company talks about delivery to the mesophyll layer, or wanting to get into the mesophyll layer, or utilizing the mesophyll layer. We got a lot of other really cool products that help get nutrition into the plant. But when it comes to foliar spraying, no one makes promises, no one makes guarantees, and that's what we like to do. So with our products, you're going to get with a product like our Overgrow, that's one I recommend everyone can check out. It's easy, easy to use. And it's all of our products all in one. So it's a lights on spray. It's going to speed up photosynthesis and nutrient uptake, making your plants more efficient. You're providing lighting, you're providing nutrients, or you maybe got no-till soil. So it's all an investment, and it's going to make it more efficient by speeding up the metabolism. It then has all your macro and micronutrients, as well as vitamins, sugars, aminos, carbs, all packed in there. And then it's going to help boost the plant health and prevent mold and increase plant health. And it's not just for cuttings. It's something that you use and grow right into mid-flower. No damage to buds, hairs, leaves, trichomes, taste. And so a lot of negativity comes up because of it, because it's like, hey, wait a minute, spraying flower. And it's like, yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to solve. And, a backstory on why I really thought about making a really dynamic multi-purpose product that's for every stage of growth is because, we're people, we solve problems, and if we're not happy with it, we want to fix it. We want to find a solution. When we find a solution, everybody wants that solution. And so I was just sick of spraying with the lights off and damaging flower and messing up the taste and having residuals. So whatever negativity people can think of, we've solved it with a product like our Overgrow, and just lights on, and you see results in if not hours, overnight.
Yeah, I think one of the huge benefits too is if for whatever reason you are having some kind of issues in your root zone and you need your plant to get some good health to kind of get back on its feet, to reboost its immune system, I find the applications of Overgrow are really, really helpful in those cases.